Hi, fifth grade. Today we're going to be learning about Module 1, Lesson 7. And for today's lesson, we're going to be learning all about rounding. So we're going to have 4 different numbers, and we're going to learn how to round them to various different place values. For this lesson, you will need this Lesson 7 template, and I should have passed this out already. It looks like this. And this is going to be the only template you will need for today. Don't forget that there is a backside, so you can use that as well. So for this lesson, what we're first going to start off with is this number 155. And what we're going to do with this number 155 is we're going to be rounding it to the tens place. So I'll just write the number right here, 155. And we're going to be rounding this to the tens and to the hundreds. So what I am going to do is I'm going to be using this template to help me out with this. And I'm going to show you how to use this template to decompose our numbers. So what I want you to take a look at right now is I have the number 155 written into my template right now. So I have 1 in my hundreds place, 5 in my tens, and then 5 in my ones. Now, to decompose this number, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move numbers over into the next place value over and over again. And I'm going to show you what this means. So my 100s is going to move with my 5 tens to make 15 tens and 5 ones. So what I did right here is I took my 100s and I moved it over with the 10s so that they're basically together. So this number 1 and this number 5 are together now, and I, in a new row, took those 1 and those 5s and put those together, and I now have 15 tens. Because if I think about it like money-wise, if I have $100 and 5 $10, then I have 150. I could also show 150 by having 15 tens. If I have 15 $10 bills, I still have that 150 plus my 5 ones. Now I can further decompose this by taking this 15 and kind of sticking it with this 5 over here, and we're going to put this in our ones column. So what that would look like is something like this. So I took my 15 tens and my 5 ones, and I put them all together, so now I have 155 ones. And the reason why I decompose my numbers is it makes it easier for me to round to certain place values. So again, it's just a different way of showing my number. Like if I were to think money-wise, if I have 155 ones, I still have the same number. It's just a different way of showing it. So today what we're going to do is we're going to use this decompose chart to help us out with rounding our numbers. So it's very important that you're following along with me through every step and taking notes along with your templates. So since I'm first rounding to the tens place, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at this row where I decompose to the tens place. And this is going to be a very important number right now, this 15. And go ahead and follow along with me in your notes now, and I'm going to show you what we're going to do with that 15 tens. So I'm going to be creating a sort of number line. This number line is vertical. It's always going to be vertical. So draw a number line that looks like this. So we have just a line with 2 arrows on the ends. Now remember that 15 tens that we were talking about earlier. So I decomposed my number 155 so that instead of having 100, 5 tens, 5 ones, I now have 15 tens and then 5 ones. I'm going to write 15 tens at the bottom because I want to round to the tens place. And then at the top, I now need to fill in the rest of my number line. What I'm going to do is I'm going to think about what is 15 plus 1. So 15 plus 1 is 16. And since my unit is tens right here, my unit is going to be tens up here as well. Then I'm going to draw a little line in the middle of my line, and this right here is going to be called my midpoint. And my midpoint, what I'm going to have to do with this is I have to think about what is halfway between 15 tens and 16 tens. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to rewrite this whole part right here. So this 15 tens, I'm going to rewrite this right here. But I'm not just going to stop right there because that wouldn't make sense if my midpoint was the same as where I'm starting at. I'm going to put a plus sign, and I'm going to think about, if I have tens right here, what's the smaller place value just to the right of that? So if I look up at my place value chart, I have tens right here, and right next to that is ones. And we're going to write 5 ones for this. And you're going to see whenever we find the midpoint, what we're always going to do is we're always going to rewrite what our starting total is at. And we'll put this here, and then we're going to add 5 of the next place value to the right. And this is going to take a lot of work to get used to, and we're going to keep practicing this, but it's always going to be this number plus 5 of the next place value over. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about, well, where would my number fall on this number line? So this was just setting up our number line, and I now need to figure out where's my number going to go on it. So if I take a look at my number where I decomposed it, I said that I have 15 tens and 5 ones. So we kind of get into a little bit of a tricky situation because my number, 15 tens and 5 ones, actually falls on the midpoint. So what that tells me is I'm just going to circle my midpoint, because that tells me that if my number falls on the midpoint, it's going to round up to 16 tens, because when I plot my number on my number line, it's ever at the midpoint or above it, I'll round up to 16 tenths. And it's okay if this is difficult and you don't understand just yet. We're going to be taking lots of notes and working on this. So don't get discouraged and feel like you can't do this, because you can. It's just going to take a lot of practice. So we have 16 tenths, and that's the number that my 155 is going to round up to. So that is why I circled this 16 tens. Now when I think about the number 16 tens, I now need to write that as a number in standard form. So what I'm going to do is, if I have 16 tens, I'm going to think about what does that look like in a place value chart. If I have 16 tens, that means I have a 6 in my tens place. And since I have number 16, I should have a 1 in my hundreds. And then since I have a decimal here and nothing here, I would have to fill that in with a 0, which leaves me with the number 160. Or you could just think of 16 tens. If I have 16 $10 bills, what would that total amount be? That would be 160. So that is my final answer for what is 155 round to the nearest tens place. Now we're going to try this number to the nearest hundreds place. So we're going to round 155 to the nearest hundreds place. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to look again at my template, and I see that in my hundreds place, this is where I want to look at right now because this is where I'm rounding to, I only have 100. So depending on the place value that you're rounding to, that's the spot you want to look at on your template. So last time we rounded to the tens, so that's why I looked at my tens place. This time I'm rounding to my hundreds, so that's why I'm just looking at this number that's in my hundreds place. So we're going to draw our number line just like last time. And just like last time, I have to fill in all the different parts. So I need to fill in up here, down here, and my midpoints. So down here, remember we started with 100, so I'm going to write 100. And then I'm going to think about what is 1 plus 1. So this spot up here is always just going to be this number plus 1. And in this case, this is really easy because that's just 2 hundreds. And then after that, I need to think about what my midpoint is. So remember, I'm going to copy this 100. So I'm going to write 100. But I'm not done just yet. Now I have to think about what's 100 plus 5. And then I think about, well, what's just to the right of my hundreds place? Just to the right of my hundreds place is my tens place. So I'm going to write plus 5 tens. Because if you think about it, this is the number 200. I can think of it as number 200. This is the number 100. And if I had 105 tens, that would be 100 150. And 150 is the number that is halfway between 200 and 100. We're just writing it in unit form to hopefully help us out a little bit with our rounding. Eventually, we will just do it like this, though. So 5th grade, now I have completed filling out my number line. What I'm going to do now is I am going to think about where does this number fall on my number line. So if I have 100 and 5 tens at my midpoint, and this number has 100 and 5 tens, what that means is that this number is also going to fall on my midpoint just like it did at this one. So I'm going to circle my midpoint because that's where my number is falling on my number line. And remember, if a number ever lands at the midpoint or above it, that means that my number rounds up. So my answer for this one is 200s. So I'll just write 200s like this, and that would be my answer for what 155 rounds to when we round to the hundreds place. And again, I know this is a little bit difficult, but we're going to keep working at it. So go ahead and make sure you have these notes in your notebook, and make sure you're following along with me on your template as well. And we're going to set up our next problem. So I'm going to erase all of this. If you didn't catch these notes, go ahead and rewind the video and get those notes. And our next problem, we are going to be taking this number 1 and 57 hundredths, and we're rounding it to the nearest whole number, and we're rounding it to the nearest 10th. So we're rounding it to the nearest whole number and the nearest 10th. And again, I'm going to be using my template chart. I'm just going to be using the other side now. So I'm first going to start off by just writing my number in my charts. So I have 1, 1. So I'll write 1, 1. And I have 5 tenths. And I have 7 hundredths. So my number in my place value chart will look like this. I have 1, 1, 5 tenths, and 7 hundredths. I now need to decompose this, which means that this 1, 1 is going to kind of join up with this 5 tenths, and it's going to create 15 tenths with 7 hundredths, just like we did with that last problem. And then I'm going to decompose it some more because I still have another place value left. So this 15 tenths is going to join up with the 7 hundredths, and it's going to create 157 hundredths. So your template should look just like mine. Please make sure you're doing this because it is going to help you when you are rounding your numbers. Now, what I'm going to do is I need to round this number to the nearest whole first. So what that means is, again, I'll draw my vertical number line. And since I'm rounding to the nearest whole number, what I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at this ones place, because a 1 is a whole number, unlike my decimal over here. So I'm going to look at the number 1 and my ones place value, and I see that I have a 1 in my ones place value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write just 1, 1 right here. So remember, I write the numeral that I see in that place value, and I write the unit of the place value that it's in. After that, I think about, well, what is 1 plus 1? Because that will make my point up here. So I have 2 1s now. And then I think about what's the halfway point or the midpoint between these two numbers. So I will rewrite what I see at the bottom. So I'll rewrite 1 1s plus, it's always plus 5. And I think about, well, what's just to the right of my ones place? That would be my tenths. So I'm going to write plus 5 tenths. And then, this is why we actually learn how to compare numbers too, because we're going to be comparing what I see here to what I see here. So if I have 1 and 5 tenths, and my midpoint is 1 and 5 tenths as well, then I am just going to circle my midpoint because that is where my number is falling. I don't care about the 7 hundredths yet because I just care about the units that I see on my number line. We don't worry about this just yet. So I have 1 1 and 5 tenths at my midpoint, and I also have 1 1 and 5 tenths, and I can even check that in my chart as well, 1 1 and 5 tenths. And remember, since my number is falling at the midpoint, that means it's going to round up to 2 ones. And 2 ones, we could just write that as the number 2. So when I think about 1 and 57 hundredths, where does that round to for the nearest whole number? It would round to the number 2. Now for the tenths, this is where it gets a little bit trickier again. So again, I'm going to draw that vertical number line, and you should be doing this in your notes. And I look at my tenths place, and I see that my decomposed tenths place has this number 15 right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this number 15 that I see in that place value, and I'm going to write the units that are right up above it. So if I have 15 tenths right here, I have the number 15, so that's the numeral I just wrote. And then up above that, I see that it's in the tenths place, so that's the unit I will write here. So 15 tenths. And then, remember, I have to fill in the top of my number line, so I think about what is 15 plus 1, and that is 16. So I have 16 tenths. And then I have to find my midpoints. So remember, again, I'm just going to copy down what I see right here. So I copy down that 15 tenths. And then I add, and remember, I'm always adding 5 of the place value. That's just to the right of this one. So if I'm working with tenths, just to the right of the tenths is the hundredths place. So I'm going to write plus 5 hundredths. And then I compare the numbers that are on my number line to the number that I'm trying to round. So if I have 1 5 tenths and 7 hundredths, I think about, well, if I have, or even 15 tenths and 7 hundredths, if I have 7 hundredths, 7 hundredths is greater than 5 hundredths. So this is going to be our first problem where my answer is not going to be right on the midpoint. It's actually going to be above it. So you can kind of think of it as like a number line. So we have 15 tenths and 5 hundredths, and then up here would be 15 tenths and 7 hundredths. So I will put that right here, and then since my number is falling above my midpoint on this number line, that means it's rounding up to 16 tenths. And then I just need to write 16 tenths as a decimal to finish up my answer. So what that means is that if I have 16 tenths, this 6 right here needs to be in my tenths place. I know that I'll have to put a decimal right there, and then I'll have a number 1 in my ones place. So my final answer should be 1 6 tenths. And that is my final answer for this problem. All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, so 5th grade, sorry about that. But my new number I'm going to be trying to round is 4 381 thousandths. And we're going to have to round it to a lot of different place values for this problem. So I'm going to do half of the place values, and then you will do the other half of the place values. What you're first going to want to do is set up your template so that it looks like this. If you need an extra template, please let me know. And what I did is I decomposed each of my place values. So if you can kind of see the pattern here, it's like I'm squishing the numbers together. So this 4 moves over with my tenths and it creates 43. Then this 43 moves in with the hundredths and it becomes 438, and so on until we get all the way to the bottom of my place value charts. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to be rounding this number to the nearest tens place. And then I'm going to round it to the nearest hundredths place. And then you will be responsible for doing the ones and the tenths. So let's start out with the tens. So I'm going to draw my number line. And this one was kind of tricky because, remember, this is my tens place, not my tenths. So I had to look at the tens place on my charts. And what I see in my tens place right now is I actually have nothing there. So what that tells me is that since I have nothing in my tens place, I'm actually going to put a 0 right here. So I'm going to write my 0 and then write the unit 10. So I have 0 tens right now because there's 0 and that's in my tens place. And then after that, at the top, I think about what's 0 plus 1. And 0 plus 1 is just 1 10. And then I have to think about what's my midpoint. So if I have 0 tens, I can just rewrite 0 tens right here. So remember, I just take this and I rewrite it up here. And then I add 5. And I think about what place value is just to the right of my tens place. Well, that's my ones place. So I'm going to write plus 5 ones. Because if you think about it, 110 is just the numeral 10. And then this would just be 0. And halfway between 0 and 10 is just the number 5. And then I have to think about, well, how many ones do I have? Well, I have 4 ones in my number. So if I have 4 ones, I'm going to compare it to my midpoint and think about, well, what's greater, 4 ones or 5 ones? 5 ones is greater. So that means that this 4 ones is going to be underneath my midpoint. And since this is underneath my midpoint, what that means is that this number actually rounds down to 0 tens. And 0 tens, how I write that as my answer is just 0. And that's all I need to do for this problem. Now, we're going to do the hundredths as well. And for the hundredths, again, I'm going to draw my vertical number line. And I'm going to take a look all the way at my hundredths place and where I decomposed that. And in my hundredths place, I had the number 438. So I have a total of 438 hundredths in this number. So I'm going to write that here. And then at the top of my number line, I'm going to think about what is this number plus 1. So 438 plus 1. That is 439 hundredths. And then I have to create my midpoint. So again, I'm going to just rewrite what I see at the bottom of my number line. So I have 438 hundredths. And then I have to add 5 of my next place value. So if I'm in the hundredths, my next place value is the thousandths. So I have 5 thousandths. Then I'm going to compare my midpoints to my number that I have here and on my place value chart, or my template right here. And I think about, well, how many thousandths does this number have? I started with 438 hundredths, and I only have 1 thousandth. So 1 thousandth is less than my midpoint with 5 thousandths. So that means that my number is going to fall on my number line down here. Since it's falling below the midpoint, what that means is that this is going to round down to 438 hundredths. And if you've noticed, I'm always circling where my number rounds to on either end, just so I can make sure that I'm showing you what my answer looks like. So now I have to write 438 hundredths as a decimal. So I know that this 8 right here has to be in my hundredths place. This 3 will then be in my tenths, which means I'll have a decimal right here. And then this 4 will be in my ones place. So I have 4 and 38 hundredths as my final answer. I would like you to round this number to the nearest ones place, and then to the nearest tenths place. Make sure you're using your chart to help you out with this. So remember, if you're rounding to the nearest ones, the bottom of that number line should have a 4. And if you're rounding to the nearest tenths place, then the bottom of your number line should have the number 43. If you need to, go back in the video and look at examples to help you do the ones and the tenths. All right, now 5th grade, if you have those answered, I'm going to be coming around to check your answers. So please make sure you raise your hand and ask for help. And then you're going to be doing one final problem, and that final problem is you're going to be solving for 9 and 975 thousandths. So you're going to be taking this number, and you're going to be rounding to the nearest 1, 10, tenth, and hundredth. After you finish all of this, then you'll be moving on to the problem set. So right now you should have checked in with me for the answers for the 1 and the tenth for rounding 4 and 381 thousandths. And after I checked with you and you got these answers correct, you will now be moving on to 9 and 975 thousandths, and you're rounding it to the nearest 1, 10, tenth, and hundredth. If you have any questions about this, please make sure you raise your hand and ask for help. All right, good job today. I know this is a really tough lesson, so make sure you ask for help if you need it, and great job.